It's May the 24th, 2019. This is 508, a show about Worcester. I'm Mike Benedetti. This is Brendan Melican.
How are you?
Brendan, I am having a bad day. How about you?
I'm surprised, but I'm having a halfway decent day. Why is your day going
I tell you, well, so we are actually taping this show at a totally different time than we normally would. At least
Yet
by,
we still have
by
a viewer
10
on
minutes.
Facebook.
At least by 10 minutes at a different time than we normally would. Because the Worcester Magazine Radio Hour was canceled today because this week we saw Gatehouse Media that owns the Telegram and that owns Worcester Magazine lay off, I think, 6 people from the Telegram and all the creative people from Worcester Magazine except for Bill Shaner.
Yes. So
there's one guy creating Worcester Magazine, creating content for Worcester Magazine.
Sounds perfectly reasonable to me, Mike.
And I feel sad about this for a couple of reasons. I feel like hating on these newspapers and these magazines has been something that I've done for a long time, as has everyone.
Sure. Maybe
secretly hoping, though, that like eventually they would get their head together and they would start making money as well as doing good work, or better work, the work that we deserve. And actually we have seen that the quality has not particularly gone up over the last 10 to 15 years. The revenue has gone way down. The amount of journalism being created has gone way down.
Yeah.
Something I've usually like to talk about on this show is an observation by the media theorist Clay Shirky. There's some stat out there that at one point at least 85% of local news came out of your local newspaper. The other 15% would have been your terrestrial radio stations, whatever, maybe your free weekly. And so he was saying, this is, again, something from 10, 15 years ago, saying, well, what do we do about the 85%? Well, maybe you try to come up with the one thing that does the 85%, but maybe you come up with 17 things that each do 5%, and that does the job. And I always felt like we were talking about being one of those 5%, or being part of some effort that was one of those 5%. And I don't think we've done it, man. Like seeing Worcester Magazine go away, which was definitely a 5%.
Yeah.
I feel like we failed at our job. Or thus far we have failed at our job.
To be clear, since nobody's been paying us, I don't know if it's our job. It's just our passion. We've failed at our passion. But yeah, it's a bummer, man. I mean, we've talked about this on and off for years as that landscape has kind of changed, and WOMAG has gone through a series of cuts and changes, and the Telegram as well. I mean, when we started doing this show, or around that time, I remember being up in like the old Telegram offices, and it was still like a newsroom, right? Like you walked in and there were people everywhere at desks. It was like what was it, season 3 or 4 of The Wire, right?
Yes.
Like that's what it looked like. But now it's like the Telegram is like the size of Worcester Magazine was when we started doing this show, and now Worcester Magazine is Bill.
Yeah, Worcester Magazine has like less personnel than this fake radio show / podcast.
Whatever the heck it is that we're doing is actually double staffed over our local alt weekly.
And honestly, for years in Worcester, we would have meetups around Worcester independent media meetups.
Sure.
Or we would have Worcester blogger meetups, and people would talk about doing this stuff. And I do feel like some alternative media in Worcester have come up and have done maybe a 5% or a 10% of the stuff, but this still looks like 85% of it's going to go away. In fact, the stuff that was being done by free weeklies and terrestrial radio probably also going away. You're talking about close to 100% of that stuff that we had 20 years ago is in jeopardy. We've seen a few people come up with these little things that are doing 5% here and there. Maybe something like Mass Live even is doing a 10 or a 15% on the city, but you're still seeing way less than the coverage that you had 20 years ago. And and this is all because of economic reasons, and we can look at how Worcester Magazine was run and gnash our teeth, but in some ways it's like a classic disruption scenario. Clay Christensen, who's the business theorist who came up with this idea of disruption, or this framing of disruption, would look at, for example, the steel industry, and that normally you would, if you want to make steel, you'd have a big steel maker foundry. My grandfather worked in the steel industry his whole life. I feel so embarrassed. I don't know what you call these things.
I think a foundry.
Yeah, and then, at some point they were like, well, you know what? We're going to have another thing where we're going to make a really teeny steel-making foundry. Like, we could even have it inside of a room, and it's just going to make some steel, and that steel's not going to be great. Yeah. It's not going to be the quality that you can make out of a big foundry, but you're going to be able to make it. You're going to be able to make smaller quantities, and it's going to be cheaper, honestly, than doing a big foundry. Like, you're going to maybe want to buy 10 or 20 of these things rather than building a new billions and billions of dollars foundry. The steel industry would be like, these little things are no threat because the steel they make is garbage. It's not up to our standards. But so all the cheap steel business suddenly is being taken away from the big foundries and going to the guys who have the teeny foundries. And then eventually the guys who are making the teeny foundries, the state of the art in that industry goes up and up and up until suddenly they are able to make quality steel. And then people like U.S. Steel, who have these giant steel plants, are like, oh no, we're screwed. And the problem there is, it's not that, they should have gotten into the foundry business at some point necessarily, because there's no point they could have gotten into, or the mini foundry business. There's no point they could have gotten into the mini foundry business when they would have done anything other than undercut their own profits.
Sure.
Maybe looking 20, 25 years down the road, you're ensuring your own survival. Mm-hmm. But in the short term, even maybe in the medium term, you're undermining yourself. So Worcester Magazine could have looked at the world 20 years ago and said, you know what, Worcester Magazine honestly is going to eventually evolve into a thing which is going to be like a 2 to 3 person, mostly online outfit. 2 to 3 people, maybe 5 people, including business people and salespeople. It's going to be, a handful of people. They're going to be creating, similar amount of content, and the ad structure is going to be different, and it's going to be all entirely online. But man, there's no point at which you can say like, yeah, we're gonna plot a new route that we know for sure is going to mean that we fire most of our people. Nobody's going to want to do that.
Right.
No ad person is going to be like, hey, figure out a plan by which you're selling ads in a completely weird new way, and you're actually selling fewer ads. Mm-hmm. 20 years from now, you may be happy that you did that, because those would be the ads that actually still exist 20 years from now. But at the time, nobody wants to be like, oh yeah, I want a lot less commissions this year. Anyway, I'm rambling.
No, but you're right though, and that's kind of the problem I think that we're in is with a media landscape that is completely driven by the publishing side of things, right? I mean, as consumers, the thing we're interested in is the editorial side of things, right? And the best place to see this is the cable news system and whatnot, right? Like, whether you're a Fox News viewer, a religious MSNBC viewer, a CNN viewer, whatever, it's you've convinced yourself that you're participating in that media landscape because of the editorial content, or
like the propaganda, the
news,
opinion.
Whatever the news part of it is. You think that's what you're actually
the content
you're there for, but it's like you're not getting it. You're actually there at the whim of the publishers, right? The publishers are the ones who are now so dominant that they're dictating what happens on the news side of things. Mm-hmm. It's why we have like these weird siloed news environments where only certain information is going to, the sphere of people that are paying attention to any one of those segments. But you see the same thing happening on a local side now too. To your point, publishers don't want to mix up their game. The game's complicated, right? But the people who are mixing up their game are like online providers of crap that, you've got news agencies that are like just producing clickbait content that's nothing more than like a sweet story about a cat or something like that comes up in your Facebook feed, and that's getting tens of thousands of eyeballs, making mountains of cash. Yet on the consumer side, we think we're being informed, or that we're choosing to be informed, when really all we're shooting for is entertainment and throwing mountains of cash at publishers that aren't doing us a favor.
Yes.
I mean, I think this is why ultimately I've almost completely gone to the public broadcasting side of things for my news, with the exception of the super large newspapers that still exist, and that's about it. And maybe that's part of the problem, is that years ago we didn't see the writing on the wall on a local level and start having conversations about publicly funded or not-for-profit style media models.
Yes,
and kind of cut the sort of failure of the media landscape before it hit us.
Earlier, we were talking about how we consume the Telegram and Gazette, and it turns out that both of us consume it in completely bizarre ways.
Which makes cost them money. Yeah.
Which costs them money, and that they are in no way trying to make money off of us as legitimate users of their service. Which again, may be a disruption thing, may just be. It makes me think that maybe a lot of people are out there consuming it in really weird ways.
Yeah.
Both of us are doing it. How are you consuming the Telegram?
So years ago, I always used the Telegram just by using incognito mode on any modern browser, right? And that somehow that would bypass whatever their cookie check was to make sure that you were a subscriber. And that worked for years. Gatehouse changed that a couple years back, and they put in a hard paywall that, like, if you're not a subscriber to the Telegram and you're not looking at something in their archives, you're not seeing anything. Except they push all of their content to Google News, which I think is something that you have to actually sign up to participate in.
Yes.
So because I have got Worcester and a couple other keywords in my long-term search for Google News, the entire Telegram is waiting for me every day on my phone via Google News, and it's actually formatted way better than the Telegram's own mobile website is. Yeah, and I get everything for free. Which always struck me as odd because, I think a lot of media companies that had gone to paywalls realized it wasn't working.
Yes.
And instead just mandated that you disable your ad blocker for that particular site, which is kind of the reason I had used the incognito mode thing in the first place, is so I could simultaneously use an ad blocker and not be paying for something, because free stuff is kind of rad. But yeah, now they seem to be one of the few, I guess it's mostly local outlets, that haven't figured that out, that you can still get my eyeballs in there and make some money off of me, which now you're getting zero. I'm just a liability for you by just forcing me to turn off my ad blocker and let me not be a subscriber.
So I look at the Telegram like I look at most websites using RSS feeds, which I think are a little bit less popular than they once were, but still pretty popular, still pretty much out there. So I used to use Google Reader, but then they shut that down, and that kind of disrupted the whole RSS deal for a while. But so I use a service called NewsBlair. You just export your old Google Reader subscriptions, and they come right in the new thing, and it's kind of a seamless move from one platform to the other. For a long time, the Telegram, I would just get like the weirdest combination of junk that would come through in that feed. And it kind of reminded me of my frustration using the Telegram in general, which is like, I'm okay to see your ads.
Right.
I don't want to see your national coverage because it's going to make me mad, and it's going to undercut my faith in your local coverage. I don't want to see your opinion coverage. Unless Telegram and Gazette, you do what you should do, which is every single person who's writing for your op-ed pages, you got to say, did you oppose the Iraq War in 2002? And if the answer is no, you say you are banned. Unless you were really young.
Yeah.
Otherwise, you are banned from ever writing for our opinion pages again because you were wrong about the big one.
Yeah. That was also one of their problems too with the editorial side, specifically with the opinion. I've got a great video that I recorded once, probably 10 years ago, of Chris and Nicola giving a talk to a group of folks out in Paxton, the former editor at the Telegram, and he actually said out loud, like while someone's standing there with a camera, that like, hey, if you got stuff that you think deserves coverage, just let me know, because even though there's and I'm paraphrasing here, but the gist of it was, even though there's an editorial board, I'm the only one who shows up to the meetings, so I am the editorial board. And I'm sitting there like, you've got to be kidding me. Like, Chris was never quiet about his political biases and whatnot.
Not at all.
And there was a fully fleshed out board, but they were just making it clear that, I'm the guy, and if you think there's something that deserves to be in here, whether it be writing a letter or, penning a column, let me know. And that's been a long-term problem, I think, with the Telegram. Yeah, the one thing they were good at was your actual local news coverage. It was Nick Katsopoulos was doing a bang-up job of covering the school committee and the city council. You had an arts and entertainment section that Victor is still doing a great job over there.
Yes.
But you go back 10, 15 years, there was a really great team that was there. Sean Suttner was doing a great job of the higher level political stuff, as well as a lot of fringe sports stuff. I think he's still doing a little bit with the tennis and the ski columns, but totally a throwback to when I was a kid, where there were columnists who were covering schoolboy sports, right?
Yes.
You wanted to know what was actually going on in your local high school football scene. We had people that covered that in Worcester, and it was amazing. And that's the crazy part too, was there was so much value from a local perspective when I was delivering the newspaper.
Yes.
Now there's no value, right?
I'll say this: there's less value, but let me get back into my previous rant, which is I don't want to see your national coverage. I don't want to see your op-ed stuff. I don't want to see your sports. Some people do. I don't. I don't really want to see your arts and entertainment coverage. Some people do. I don't. I want to see your local hard news coverage.
Yeah.
That's all I want to see. You can show me all the ads you want, but don't make me page through a bunch of other junk that I don't want to see.
Sure.
Because you're just wasting my time. You're just taking away the value of that stuff. You making me look at sports articles or making me look at national news articles isn't making you any money either.
Right.
It's just wasting everyone's time. And it makes me realize that you don't have any idea what I want as a consumer. That if I buy that paper from you, 90% of the pages in that paper I'm buying from you are garbage that I don't want in that paper.
Yeah.
And I don't want to look at them. And I'm happy to look at the ads. I want you to sell me the 10% that I want. RSS wise, they actually started doing this. They had an RSS feed that's just the local news, and that's all the local news. And so now I can see this in the RSS reader. And of course, they only show me the headline and like the first paragraph, because they're like, okay, we don't want you to just read everything in the RSS reader. We want you to eventually click through to look at the thing with the ads. And I'm like, great, that sounds reasonable to me. I do think that they should be selling ads in the RSS feed. There's a few blogs that do this. The Mac blog, the Apple blog Daring Fireball does this. Every week they're like, this week's RSS feed sponsor is, bob.com or whatever. This is you're going to reach a certain very specific weird tech audience if you're selling the RSS ad, but you should do it, or just have an ad in the RSS feed along with the article.
But it goes back to the point that I was making of having robust content. So like you might not be into local schoolboy sports or whatever, right? But you're into something, and providing a quality content is the key. I mean, the podcast universe, I think, is where you see some really interesting small podcasts. Find it pretty easy to not that we've really ever tried, but I think there's been a couple offers there. But even smaller podcasts find it pretty easy to bring in advertisers and get some degree of support. You look at large podcasts that are out there, they're making bank, and people don't seem to mind listening to a few live reads for really good content.
Right.
But that's the hook. It's got to be really good content. Even the Patreon thing and, some of the other subscription-based models have worked pretty well for folks, but the content is what matters, and I feel like that's the thing that has just slid by the wayside. And you're not going to strengthen that side of your business model by firing everybody.
That's a whole separate question. But so just to continue this, like I see these headlines come through, and then I do what I do again with most things, which is if I'm not going to read it right then, I save it into an article reader. Again, a lot of people do this. I think I use one called Pocket. So I save it into Pocket, and so because of the mysteries of how the Telegram Gazette website works, while my feed reader doesn't see the full article, Pocket does. And I do that in part so that I can keep track of this article, and in part so that I can then read it later without your website being the super ugly thing that it is. 99% of the websites out there, you would rather read in your reader app than on the web. And Gatehouse's default web template is exactly this way, where Pocket is always a better way to read any article in the Telegram Gazette, more than Telegram.com. So now the Telegram is like, great, by doing the thing that you're normally doing, no secret agenda, I read every website this exact way, you're giving me exactly what I want. You're giving it to me in a way that I can read it really well. I'm really grateful for this. But you're not attempting at any point in this time to actually take money from me or taking money from anybody to give me this service. And I'm like, why aren't you doing this? Like, I want Nick Katopoulos to keep doing his job. And at this point, look, I can walk into his office and give him an envelope with a $5 bill in it every once in a while, I guess. I don't know how else to work with the free market and work with what you're doing, Gatehouse Media, to support your project, because you're not attempting to make any money off of me.
I think we're almost at the point where just asking Nick to go out to grab a beer with you and just say, so what's happening? And that's the best way to get your news, because it's if they keep cutting people the way they are, there's not going to be much of that left. And it's
that's I think is the separate thing. But go ahead.
But I think the thing that we were talking about when we walked in the door together, and we were both talking about the very different ways that we consume the Telegram, but that are similar in the fact that we don't pay for anything. We can't be the only people doing that, and that's going to be the key, right? So, I think, years ago when we started this, we might have been slightly on the nerdy side of things. We're both old now.
We're both in our 40s.
Creatures of habit. We're not, breaking trends, and we're not, writing algorithms to help us, scam the Telegram. It's really just that easy that when I pick up my phone every morning, the entirety of the Telegram is waiting for me in Google News, and it's formatted better than the Telegram is able to format their news themselves, and I'm not missing anything. And that is problematic from the perspective of they can't seem to figure out the revenue generation side of things, yet two middle-aged cats that aren't trying very hard are able to get all their content for free.
Now, we'll go back and say that the reason that they're not doing this is not because they're stupid and not because we're smarter than them, because we're not. The reason that they're doing this is because they're actually probably smarter than us, and they realize that newspapers are a gold mine, and that there's one way in which we use it's a gold mine to mean it's this endless source of money. And another way to think about a gold mine is it's a source of money which, when you take all the gold out of it, there's none left. There's a certain amount. There's no sustainable gold mine.
Yeah.
We let the gold mine sit fallow for a few years and gold builds up and we mine it again. There's a certain amount of money in there. And they say, listen, there are people whose habit it is to do the things that make the Telegram money, like buy the print paper. They're in the habit of doing that. Yeah. They're going to do that forever until they die. Younger people are not going to do that. They're never going to get in the habit of doing that. You and I, for example, were once in the habit of doing this. We're now way out of the habit of doing this. But I think that they're saying about younger people and about us, they're saying there's no actual non-science fiction story way to keep running the Telegram long term, to keep running Worcester Magazine long term. That you run it like a gold mine. You say every year you fire some reporters, you shrink the size of the paper, you make it match however many people who you have who are now honestly at this point probably in their 60s and above. Luckily, people are living longer lives than ever. Yeah. And as long as there are people in that cohort, as long as there are baby boomers alive in the city of Worcester, those people will be giving you money. The people younger than you younger than them have no habits and no anything that where the Telegram and Gazette is going to be the most competitive way to satisfy any of their needs. And so we're not even going to worry about them. So we're not going to worry about selling RSS ads because the plan is not to try to make this thing last forever. It's to make this thing last another 10 years.
But the flip side of that, I think, is that the newest sort of insert to the Worcester media landscape, which is Mass Live.
Yes.
Their back end is still the Springfield Republican, right? Like, which seems to be a little bit more solvent, I guess, from a publishing perspective as an independent news. I believe they're still independent, right? They haven't been picked up by one of the bigger.
Honestly, I always thought that they were, but I couldn't tell you for sure.
But I mean, Mass Live now has a Worcester-based office that's growing, and it's like, again, you walk in there, it's not as enormous as the old Telegram offices were, but it's a healthy, buzzing news office, and they're generating really good local news content, especially when it comes to like the breaking news side of things. From my perspective, their downfall is that there's a lot of clickbaity type stuff in there as well too.
So honestly, I don't read a lot of Worcester news via Mass Live because Mass Live doesn't have here's all the Worcester news and I'm going to give it to you in some easy to automate subscription way.
Yeah, I mean, there is, I think on their website, I think there is a tab that is Worcester only.
Okay.
But it also prioritizes the things that they know are going to get clicks, because all the savviness that I think the Telegram and Worcester Magazine may have been lacking, or Gatehouse in general, in terms of online delivery of content, Mass Live's really good at, right? Like, they're good at luring in eyeballs. Unfortunately, like, when I want to read news, I want news. I don't necessarily want, a top 10 list or a listicle or whatnot. A little bit of that, I think, is important, because we are talking about the best way to draw in eyeballs online. Neither of us have really, at any part of our experience in terms of consumption of local news, have we been talking about the joys of picking up a print edition of something.
This is actually funny, like talking about my weird ways of reading news. So I save all of my articles to a newsreader. Whenever I save a Mass Live article, the newsreader does keep track of it. And then whenever I want to look at it, whatever technical thing is happening in the background, Mass Live says, no, I'm not going to let you I'm not going to let you save my text. I'm going to just show you the webpage of Mass Live. So when I want to print out Mass Live's article about WMAG firing all these people, here's what I have: the Mass Live website. Yeah. That's what my reader lets me see. And my ad blocker may be blocking some ads here, but at least Mass Live is like aware of things to that level, that they're saying, like, we actually don't want your normal workflow we actually don't want your normal workflow. We don't want to break your normal workflow, but we actually do want to attempt to make some money from you when you're using your normal workflow, in a way which Gatehouse's setup is not doing that.
And I think that's, again, where your workflow, just like mine in terms of reading or consumption, might be a little bit weird. I'm going to assume that a lot of Mass Live's readers are coming through from social media, whether it be Facebook or Twitter or what have you. That seems to be the part that they have figured out, and I still to this day can't figure out what the Telegram's web presence is. It's like, Clive McFarland's columns will like bubble up into my news feed. I don't know why, but almost no other story from the Telegram ever shows up into a Facebook news feed. And if I try and go to the Telegram's own page on Facebook, there's like 20 of them. And I seem to always get, ones that don't make any sense. Like they're there for like corporate pages, or they're a publishing side of things. Like I can rarely find the Telegram and Gazette's Facebook feed, which might actually be helpful and help them generate a little bit of revenue by putting my eyes somewhere on their properties. They make it really hard to do.
And let me say this then. I mean, we can complain about the things we don't like about these things for all the day long. Mm-hmm. Like ultimately, I feel like our criticisms of the Telegram are more valid in that they are cutting back on Worcester coverage this year, and they will probably cut back on Worcester coverage next year. They're almost certainly planning to.
Yeah.
And that our criticisms of Mass Live are invalid in that they are not cutting back on their Worcester coverage this year, and they are probably not going to cut back on their Worcester coverage next year.
Right.
And so it's working. It's working to preserve a reasonable amount of Worcester coverage, and details are not that the details of implementation we can bitch and moan about, but they're not that important. If you're getting the journalists paid for and you're creating the stuff, and if it's good stuff, then more power to you. You're doing it right. You're doing it right. We know who's qualified to be on the ballot this year in Worcester elections. At large, we have these incumbents. We have Gary Rosen, Christian King, Joe Petty, Mo Bergman, Kate Toomey. We have the district councilors, Sean Rose, Candy Carlson, George Russell, Sarai Rivera, Matt Wally. We have the one incumbent who's not running for re-election, Connie Lukes. Here are the challengers that we have at large. Tony Economou, former member of the council. Donna Calorio, former member of the school committee. Evan Corrigan, Owura Kwaku Poku Sardokie, Atel Hajai, Ralph Tissione Jr., Bill Coleman, James Bedard, Jesse Gibson, Sean Peretti-Noon. Here are the district councilor challengers. John Hainsby Honeycutt.
That's all we got.
That's it. One district has one challenger on the ballot this year. The other four people are just kicking back.
Which is, unless all these challengers on the at-large side all live in the same district, that makes no sense.
It is weird. On the school committee, we have incumbents Diana Biancario, Molly McCullough, John Manfredo. I know it was you, Manfredo. You broke my heart. You broke my heart. Jack Foley, Brian O'Connell. And then the challengers, you have a lot of challengers who have qualified to be on the ballot. Kara Berg-Powers, Laura Clancy, Chantal Bethier, Jermo Kamora, John Trobaugh, Tracy Novick, sorry, I'm getting people's names wrong. Hermone McConnor and Mariah Martinez. So a lot of challengers on the school committee still. The big news there is this Dante Comparetto, controversial incumbent, is not running for re-election. This is a whole separate can of worms that I don't want to talk about today.
It's a whole different
show. That's a whole different, Transportation news. We have a report from the Worcester Regional Research Bureau arguing that taking the bus in Worcester should be free. We've noted this on this show that fares make up very little WRTA revenue. If you use an electronic bus pass, I think a bus ticket is like $1.60. The WRTA kicks in an extra $4.60. What? Whoa! The Research Bureau helpfully notes that the WRTA spends $1.45 to take one passenger 1 mile.
Yeah.
Based on my last Lyft ride in the city of Worcester, I paid something like $2.80 a mile. Mm-hmm. Of course, Lyft and Uber are both losing money at present, so I'm going to kick in an extra eighth. I think that they're basically subsidizing like an eighth of my ride, so that it's probably really costing me like $3.16 per mile to take a Lyft in Worcester by myself. And again, this is versus $1.60 or $1.45 cost for the bus to do it. So the bus costs half of what a single passenger Lyft costs. So our buses, that right there, it's like at least within the realm of possibility that this could make sense.
You know what the problem is?
Yes.
And it just dawned on me now. Like, you're creating great anxiety inside of me right now.
Because I'm saying numbers?
Not just because of the numbers and me being terrible at math. It's more because this is precisely the conversation we just had about publishing, but the conversation that we should have had about publishing 10, 15 years ago. The reality is that you and I both, and most human beings, want information, right? Like, we know that.
Yes.
They want information. But the cost of delivering that information doesn't, in a positive way, doesn't actually check out. in the same way that like we know people want to move, get from point A to point B, but thus far we haven't found a way to move people from point A to point B in a way that where the numbers check out and is cost effective.
As far as the public transit system.
Yes, well, I mean, Lyft and Uber are, I don't think we're at the point where we're considering them public transportation yet, even though they're open to the public. They're privatized and they're bleeding cash too. It seems like nobody can figure out how to make a dime off of moving people. Are we actually just at the point, just by virtue of talking about these two topics, where we can just call game on Idiocracy, and that we just need to get our big bathroom Barca lounger chairs and just sit down and watch TV for the rest of our lives?
I want to go on record as saying I don't like Idiocracy. Yeah. I think it's a very negative movie.
It is a very negative movie, but this is what I mean.
It's too mean. And anyway, so right now the buses are at like 45% capacity in Worcester, which on the one hand is kind of high.
That was actually higher. That was the one thing in that study that, because I think when we were talking about, I don't know if we had ridership rates last time we talked about this in the fall.
This study has a lot of good info that I haven't seen in other places.
Yeah. Well, and I was good on the Research Bureau.
They're doing a 5%. At least this week they're doing 5% with this study. I mean, honestly.
Yeah,
right?
no. This is huge. And good on them, I think, for taking that position that, hey, I know we're supposed to be generating some revenue here, but maybe you're not, and people still need transportation. Maybe you can get more riders by... Yeah, I don't know.
Well, their paper is called The Implications of a Fare-Free WRTA, and the implications are basically that right now, again, we're running the buses at half capacity. The WRTA collects $3 million in fares. It spends $850,000 to collect that $3 million in fares. So if we draw a pie chart, fares make up like 14% of the WRTA's budget. But if we discount the fact that they cost a lot of money to get that 14%, really we're netting it's like 10%. So like if we cut fares, if we were like there's no more fares, the bus is free love, free bus, it would be like 10% of the WRTA budget that we would have to then make up because people wouldn't be giving them money. That would be like right now the budget is like 27 million, so this would be like $3 million a year. I guess the question is, like, when we're talking about public transit spending, is it worth it to spend an extra $3 million on the year on the WRTA and then suddenly maybe ridership spikes, doesn't keep collapsing?
I see an opportunity here, though, where maybe the only way to receive unfettered access to the Telegram and Gazette is every time you step on a WRTA bus, you get a choice, either a paper copy, yes, or unfettered access via your digital device, and the Telegram ends up underwriting
the extra $3 million,
underwriting the bus transportation by virtue of all the extra eyeballs that they'll see converting for advertisements.
This is a nice idea. Anyway,
people will just be riding the bus all day just to read the news.
Anyway, this is a nice article. It's nice to see this. They don't sort of go into the question that we're always asking, which is the implications of somehow turning Uber into the WRTA.
We need to get Holden Man on the new director.
Holden Man Dennis Lipka. We'll get him on here. Anyway, transportation news too, which is that the Kelly Square rebuild will start this fall, continuing through the following fall. Do we want to talk about plastic this week? No. No, because we're already so frustrated by the world. Do we want to talk about Worcester water use this week? This is Nick Katsopoulos doing his 5% right here. Did you see this article by him about Worcester water use?
We'd back up. Kelly Square redesign.
Oh,
just dawned on me because he's also a presence on this radio station. I think we need to be working over Councillor Gary Rosen to get rubber sidewalks installed all throughout the new peanut design of Kelly Square. Gary Rosen's had the long-standing rubber sidewalk idea. I think that Kelly Square is the place to do it. We need to kick the tires in that bus.
I wonder if we took $3 million of funding and put it into a statue of Gary Rosen in Kelly Square. How tall could that statue be for $3 million?
What was the statue made out of?
I don't know anything
Table
about
talk pies.
It could be made out of anything. It could be made out of anything. Combs, I assume.
Can we take the $3 million away from the WRTA and just slide it into a giant statue? The bigger question is, so if you get a giant statue of Gary Rosen in Kelly Square, does that does Gary then hold a sign at the base of that statue in Kelly Square, or does he stop holding signs in general because the statue's there?
This
with the
statue
sign?
only gets erected once he promises to permanently retire, and this statue is holding a replica of a Gary Rosen at-large sign.
It is, okay.
And he'll get a humongous amount of write-ins then from now to the end of time, every single election, because the main election ad people will see in Worcester is our permanent election ad for Gary Rosen.
There's going to be a hook there too, where like when you're at a red light, or there's no red lights in the intersection, so as you're passing around the intersection, like the statue would be timed to spit out combs at drivers passing by. So or maybe the people who are walking through, you can kick Gary's shoe and a little comb will slide out.
Maybe we take $1 million of that and people get $1 and a comb, both.
Seems like a
first million people.
Seems like a deal to me.
Actually, before I go on to more Worcester news about water use, I actually wanted to mention, like,
are we going straight through? Do we have any?
We're going straight through. We're going to do it for about 5-10 more minutes. Like, whenever we were talking about, like, we should have been having these conversations with numbers about Worcester's media 10 or 20 years ago, I think the challenge there was that we didn't have this information, right? Like, there was no public information on, like, the Telegram and Gazette's value per customer, whatever. They had that internally, but there was nothing public about this. So I want to share some public information with the public about Worcester's media today, to the extent that I can, which is how many people watch this show, which is 100 people. It used to be 50 back in the day.
Yeah.
Since the last decade, we've doubled that to 100. They are people who care about the show.
Yeah.
People talk to us all the time about it. We put it out in the world through about 10 different means.
Yeah.
So we get about 10 hits in every one of those 10 different ways. But that's how many people watch this show.
Yeah. And
I was thinking about, again, like us feeling like we're falling down on even being part of a 5%, even doing a 1%. Like, what kind of incentive would I need?
Mm-hmm.
Like, if people were paying me to spend time on this show every week, would we do an even better job? I mean, it's hard to think about us doing a better job. Is it possible?
I don't know. That's.
I don't think that it's that. I think that it's lack of feedback. Honestly, like, if I was getting feedback on the show, if I was getting 10 times as much feedback on the show every week, positive or negative, I might regret asking for this. But that's what I would like to see. Like, if you're somebody who watches this show and you want to keep some sort of incentive for us to do this show, you should be like sending us emails, commenting, whatever. Don't worry about liking us on iTunes and sharing us on your feeds. You can do that if you want to. But just like, if you talk to us occasionally about what you like in the show, what you don't like in the show, what we need to have, just something, that would to me be a big incentive to try to do a better job on the show.
Right.
Maybe impossible to do a better job on this show for one reason or another, but still. You know, Brendan, we're getting more efficient with our water use, and Nick Kotsopoulos has a nice article about this in the Telegram and Gazette, for which I had no means to give him any money for this great information. And because people are using, there's more efficient water use, we're actually using less water than we were in decades past.
Right.
But there's still a lot of fixed costs in our water delivery system. Mm-hmm. And because the water delivery system is paid for, I think, entirely by fees, per gallon fees, like, the number of gallons goes down, the cost stays basically the same. The price per gallon has to start going up in order to meet that fixed cost. Right. So he just notes that this is kind of a funny situation.
I didn't see this piece. Is there any discussion in there about infrastructure?
There is some discussion about infrastructure. Is there anything in here about how we're probably way overdue for some sort of once in 100-year collapse of all the pipes in Worcester overnight? No, they don't talk. And the fact that we need to spend $1 trillion in completely replacing all of our pipes, it doesn't say this. It doesn't mention this. I know that this is a totally separate issue. Commodities news. Brent crude oil is $68 a barrel, down 6% on the week. Bitcoin is $8,000, up 10% on the week and up 5% on the year. Prices of Bitcoin crashed at the end of last year, but in April and May they've doubled so far.
I keep finding more and more stories from sort of wonky, tech geniuses, that are back to predicting, $250,000. Like that's where it's headed to. I don't know.
I don't know. I mean, I don't know.
I just feel bad. I still feel I don't even dabble with any Bitcoin, Litecoin, Ethereum were the three that I kind of played with a little bit, but it was long before they all shot through the roof.
Right.
I still am heartbroken for all of the people that drove that bubble to where it actually went. That I feel like that's an untold story.
That a few people got rich and a lot of people lost a lot of money.
Yeah, like, and I haven't seen much coverage of that. I mean, I was meeting people who are like, older folks, fixed income, who were like suddenly had wallets on their app and were like showing off how much Bitcoin they owned, and like, yeah, I don't know, and buying it at the wrong time when, but whatever.
Yeah, I mean that is what it is. A lot of things are what they are, Brendan.
They are what they are.
The Worcester Memorial Auditorium will theoretically be sold in 2 years, to an organization that will spend almost $100 million to renovate it. This plan sounds insane to me. For example, it will include an IMAX theater. Do we even want to talk about this insanity here? Here's the final news of the week. Gabby, this is just to perk us all up as our last news of the week. It's actually not nice, not even in a funny way.
Maybe Free Guy could be the first movie that they show in the new IMAX theater.
Probably
not going to
2 years from now. Nah, they're not even going to buy it till we're not going to have an IMAX theater till like 5 years minimum.
After IMAX is obsolete, that's when we're going to build our obsolete. We're going to have Carousel as well.
New statistics from the state show that even as opioid overdose deaths are declining in Massachusetts, they shot up 21% in Worcester last year. Now, we previously cited on the show the Worcester Police Department stats that they had responded to more overdoses last year than the previous year, but they had seen fewer deaths than the previous year.
Right.
They had seen 69 deaths. So last year, the Worcester Police Department is like, we saw 69 people die of opioid overdoses in the city.
Yep.
And the State Department of Public Health is like, actually, we think there was 134.
Do you have...
Yeah. So this is like a 20% bump year over year in our opioid overdose deaths.
Are we sure that this is, when they're talking overdoses, that we're only talking opioids here? That was one thing I didn't have the time to double back.
Opioid-related overdose deaths.
Because I feel as though this is something I've seen come through like minutes from a handful of public safety meetings. I have a bad habit of subscribing to the mailing list of like public safety groups throughout the city and whatnot, just to try and see what they're discussing, or having them forwarded to me. And it seems like that's always a conversation, whether you're in a public safety group from Tannic Square or Main South. Like neighbors always want to have updates on overdoses, drugs in general. I feel like a lot of the messaging that keeps going back to residents is that from the police department perspective, they're seeing overdoses dropping or leveling out, but then saying that, things like they always use the term K2, even though there's a million different varieties, and K2 itself hasn't really even been a thing for like a decade now, but that's whatever the general term people use. They're always reporting that that's the problem. And I'm curious, if this is like one of those cases where when you get brought into an emergency room, you're getting a blood pull, right? Like, so you're drawing blood from somebody, and whatever shows up in that panel is going into a database that's showing like this is what this person had in their system when they presented at the emergency room.
Yeah.
Whether it's a fatality or you end up going on your own, which is also always one of those things that like it led to fear about marijuana, right? Was the number of people that would show up in an emergency room that had marijuana in their system. Well, when that data is collected, there's no like asterisk that says, but they came in for an earache. Like, you just have somebody that has.
So it's going to be a similar thing where it's like this person came in for a K2 thing, but they also had done some fentanyl or whatever that day.
Or an opioid at some point in time. Like,
so if we search opioid, it's people who died and the word opioid is in their record, you're going to have a lot more people than people who actually died of the opioid. I don't know.
And I'm not sure that what's going on. I just didn't get a chance to dig deep enough to see how they were pulling this data, because I think that is kind of important. If we are hearing from law enforcement that there are other substances that are problematic, that we know are problematic. Let
me interrupt you here.
Yeah, interrupt, please.
Technical notes. Opioids include heroin, illicitly manufactured fentanyl, opioid-based prescription painkillers, and other unspecified opioids. Cases were defined using the International Classification of Disease Codes for Mortality. The following codes were selected from the underlying cause of death field to identify poisonings/overdoses. X40 through 49, X60 through 69, etc., etc. All multiple cause of death fields were then used to identify an opioid-related death, T40, T40.1, T40.2, etc. This report tracks all opioid-related overdoses due to difficulties in reporting heroin-associated overdoses separately. Many deaths related to heroin are not specifically coded as such due to the fast metabolism of heroin into morphine. So, I don't know what that means. I mean, that's how they're defining them.
I get it. It's one of those things that when you that data comes from a very.
That's a lot of people. That means I feel like that's more than 1 out of 2,000 people in the city of Worcester. That's actually close to back in the day, 1 out of 1,000 people in the city of Worcester dying every year, right?
But I guess it also, this is another thing that I think would be very, very interesting to see, point of origin, residency as well, too. Are these all folks that are living in Worcester?
Well, Brendan Melican, I'm happy you asked me that question because there's 2 stats.
Good.
So the stat for town of residence for the decedent, Worcester went from 80 up to 97, 2017 to 2018. If we're looking for the town of death occurrence, is where Worcester goes from 116 to 134. So actually, 134 is, there's a lot of people coming from out of town to die in the city of Worcester of opioid overdoses. And so it's not it's a little bit higher than the number of actual Worcester residents who are dying. But still, it's 1 out of 2,000 people in the city of Worcester. I mean, if you look at it, if you were at a big baseball game or whatever, and you're like, oh yeah, five people at this game are going to die this year, you'd be like, sure, I'm sure 5 people in this game are going to die this month. But to say 5 people at this game are going to die this year, specifically of opioid overdoses, is kind of bizarre.
I'm with you.
That's a lot of people, man. A lot of drugs. Anyway, everybody who's watching this show, I think, is making Worcester a stronger place and a better place. Keep it up. Gabby, stay strong. All right, we're starting at a weird time. We're ending at a weird time.
Are we done?
Yes. What do you want to talk about?
I have nothing I want to talk about. This is I usually feed off of whatever the WOMAG guys are talking about before us.
I know. This is, again, why this is a weird, I feel very emotional about this Worcester Magazine thing, in part because I feel like it impacts my life not only as a thing gone from the city, but it's people who I know, and it's a show that I'm used to coming in here an hour early and listening to these people.
Maybe you could start sliding some content that didn't pass muster for Happiness Pony over to Bill, and he could tuck some of that into.
I guess I could just be talking to Bill on the phone every Friday for an hour, but that seems a little much.
Yeah, we should invite Bill down to.
We should
be part of our show.
We should. All right. Well, this has been 508, a show about Worcester.
Until next time.